And I'm extremely delighted to introduce our next speaker, Mr. Rob Schwartz from US. Rob is a certified hypnotist and regression therapist who offers past life and between life soul regressions to help people understand and heal the life plan they chose before coming into incarnation. He also assists people with spiritual guidance sessions and contact of a deceased loved one's regressions. Rob is also an author of two groundbreaking books. One, Your Soul's Plan, about discovering the real meaning of your life you planned before you were born, and his second book, Your Soul's Gift, which is about the healing power of the life you planned before you were born. Working closely with several mediums and channels, he has now explored the pre-birth plans of many people. He has learned that events in their lives are neither random nor arbitrary, but rather part of a wisely conceived and intricate plan, a plan they themselves bravely designed. I now welcome Rob, who is going to talk about the soul's plan. The stage is all yours, Rob.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. And I'd like to thank Ravi.
Welcome, sir. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
We are all very happy to see you here in flesh and blood.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I want to thank Ravi and all the conference organizers for inviting me to participate. It's a pleasure to be with you today. As was stated in the introduction, I'm an American hypnotist specializing in something called a between lives soul regression, which I'll talk about a little bit later. It's a form of hypnosis in which you can find out what you planned before you were born, why you made those plans, how you're doing in terms of fulfilling your plan, and how you can better fulfill your plan. And I'm the author of two books, Your Soul's Plan and Your Soul's Gift, the premise of which is that we ourselves plan our lives, including our biggest challenges, before we come into body. And that's what this talk today is going to be about. I'm going to share with you what I found in my research, the main reasons I have discovered why we ourselves plan great challenges for ourselves before we're born. I want to start this presentation by sharing with you, and let me say the website is yoursoulsplan.com. And if you go to the books pages there, you can actually read large excerpts from both books for free. I want to start by sharing with you a little bit about myself, my own spiritual journey, and how I came to write two books about this very unusual subject. And then I will share with you what I found in my research, the 5 main reasons why we ourselves plan great challenges before we come into body. And then I'll share with you 1 or 2 true stories about pre-birth planning so you can get a better sense of how it works. And then if there's any time at the end, I'll be happy to take questions. So who am I and how did I come to write 2 books about this quite unusual subject? For me, the path to writing Your Soul's Plan and then later Your Soul's Gift started in Chicago back in the year 2003. And at that time, I was self-employed as a marketing and communications consultant, basically doing different forms of corporate writing. I have an MBA and was in the corporate sector doing this kind of work. I found this work to be deeply unfulfilling. I used to say to people at the time that I had the feeling if I fell off the face of the earth, my clients would hardly even notice that I was gone. They would just plug somebody else into that role and carry right along. But at the same time, I had the distinct sense that there was some kind of plan to my life, something that I was supposed to be doing, but I didn't know what it was, and I didn't even know how to figure out what it was. Now, it's important for you to understand, I come from a very conventional background. I grew up in a conventional suburb of Cleveland, Ohio, in the United States. I come from a conventional family. They might not like that description, but I think we were. And I have a conventional education based on the scientific method. So back in 2003, when I was having what you could call an existential crisis about my life, my first attempts to resolve it were very conventional in nature. The first thing I did was just to go for career counseling, and I took the Myers-Briggs inventory, which probably some of you have heard of. I found out that I'm an INFJ personality type, and while that was interesting, it didn't tell me what to do with my life. So then I went to a lot of my friends and family, and I said, you know, I'm very unhappy doing this corporate work. I feel like there's something else I'm supposed to be doing with my life, but I don't know what it is. What do you think I should do with my life? That, it turns out, is not a good question to ever ask another person. About half the people I asked literally shrugged their shoulders and said, I don't know. And the other half advised me to do whatever they were doing for a living, which, as you can imagine, was not tremendously helpful. So when that didn't shed any light on the matter, I thought, okay, got to think outside the box here. What can I do to figure out my soul's plan, so to speak? And this idea came to me: go see a psychic medium. Now, again, I come from a very conventional background. Mediumship is not part of that background. I wasn't even sure if I believed in mediumship, but I thought, why not? You know, I'll invest an hour of my time, a little bit of money, and if nothing comes out of it, there's no harm done. So I did this for the very first time in my life on May 7th of 2003. The reason I remember the date is that this was the day on which my life changed. The medium started the session by introducing me to the concept of spirit guides, which I had never even heard of at that point in my life. And she explained to me that a guide is a highly evolved non-physical being with whom we plan our lives before we're born, and who then guides us through our lives after we come into body. And through this particular medium, I was actually able to talk with my guides that day. Now, they said a lot of amazing things to me that day, one of which was, they said, you planned your life, including your biggest challenges, before you were born. And I will tell you, I just shook my head and I said, why in the world did I do that? And they said, you did this for purposes of spiritual growth. Now, coming as I did from such a conventional background, I probably would have dismissed all of this as some kind of hallucination on my part, except that the guides then went on to tell me what all of my biggest challenges had been without me telling them anything about myself. And they were able to explain in some detail why I had wanted to have those very difficult experiences. So as you can imagine, if you're talking to beings who know literally everything about you without you telling them anything, that gives them a lot of credibility. So when they introduced this idea of pre-birth planning, I was listening very, very closely. Now, I can't overstate to you the impact that this perspective had on me. In the days and weeks after the session with the medium, I thought about this constantly. And the effect that it had was that it allowed me to review the course of my life, and for the first time in many instances, see a deeper meaning or a deeper purpose to the most difficult things that had happened. And for me, that created quite a profound healing. So I realized I was onto a concept that could bring a similar kind of healing to other people. And it was at that point that I first started to think about writing a book on the subject. Now, within a very short time of the session with the medium, I started for the first time in my life to have spiritual experiences of my own. And I don't have time today to share all of them with you, but I want to share one, which to this day is still the single most profound spiritual experience I've ever had. Only a couple of weeks after the session with the medium, I was home in my apartment, alone in Chicago, Illinois, just having an average workday. And I decided to take a break and go for a walk. So I'm walking down the sidewalk in Chicago when all of a sudden, I was overcome by this feeling of overwhelming unconditional love for every person I saw. And when I say unconditional love here, I don't mean the kind of love you might feel for a parent or a child or a romantic partner. This was an experience of divine love. It was a transcendent experience. I remember it very clearly because the first person I saw after this feeling came over me was a cab driver. He was sitting behind the wheel of his cab waiting for a customer to come along. And I looked at this man, who of course was a complete stranger to me, and just felt pure, overwhelming, unconditional love for him. And then I looked up and I saw a man's barber shop on the corner. I looked through the window and I saw the barber cutting a customer's hair. Again, two total strangers. But as I looked at them, there again was this feeling of pure, overwhelming, unconditional love. And then I turned around and I saw a young woman, a mother, pushing an infant in a stroller down the sidewalk. And there again, as I looked at them, was this feeling of pure, unconditional love. Everywhere I looked, every time I saw another person, this feeling was present. Now, I had never heard of anything like this or read about anything like this, but I understood intuitively what was happening, which was I was in some form of enhanced immediate communion with my own soul. So it's as though my soul were saying to me, this love is who you really are. This is your true nature. And I believe that my soul gifted me with that experience that day, because much later, after I had looked at many, many people's pre-birth plans for the two books, Your Soul's Plan and Your Soul's Gift, I realized that every single pre-birth plan I had studied, literally every single one, was based on complete unconditional love. This was true even when great challenges were being planned. This was true even when quote unquote negative roles were being scripted for people. It was always based on total unconditional love. If I had not had that experience of myself as unconditional love walking down the street that day, I would still have found that same result in my research. But I think there would always have been this little voice at the back of my head saying, how do you know this is true? How do you know that every pre-birth plan is based on unconditional love? Well, I know it's true because of the experience I had walking down the street that day. It's because of that experience that I can say to you right now with complete confidence and complete certainty that I believe that we as souls are made literally from the energy of unconditional love, because that was my experience walking down the sidewalk that day. Now, within a very short time of that experience, something else quite important happened. I mentioned that I was living in Chicago. Out of personal interest, I had been going to meetings of the Chicago IANDS chapter. IANDS, I-A-N-D-S, the International Association of Near-Death Studies. This is a group for people who have had near-death experiences, the tunnel of white light, and so forth. I myself have not had an NDE, but I think it's a fascinating subject. And so out of personal interest, I have been going to their meetings. Not long after the session with the medium, and not long after my experience of myself as unconditional love walking down the street that day, when I was first thinking of writing a book about how we plan our lives before we're born, I went to the woman who runs the Chicago IANDS chapter, and I said to her, Diane, I'm thinking of writing a book about how we plan our lives before we're born, but I don't have any idea how to research a book on that subject. Do you have any ideas for me? She said, Rob, there's a member of our group here you absolutely have to talk to. She introduced me to a woman who has the ability to go into trance and channel her own soul, her higher self. So I said to her, thinking of writing a book about how we plan our lives before we're born, may I interview your soul? And fortunately for me, she said yes. She and I got together 5 times for a total of about 15 hours. And in this 15 hours of channeling, this huge volume of information came forward that verified everything my guides had said to me through the medium, but then expanded upon it greatly. So her soul told me in detail how pre-birth planning works, which challenges had been discussed for her, which ones had been chosen and why, which ones had not been chosen and why not. And so again, this huge volume of information came forward that in many ways served as the foundation for the 2 books I went on to write. So there was this confluence of events, all within a very short time period. The session with the medium, my experience of myself as unconditional love, this woman's channeling of her soul. These 3 things happened within a very short time of each other, and combined, they gave me the push I needed to decide I would in fact leave the corporate sector and attempt to write a book about how we plan our lives before birth. Now, once I made that decision, of course, the first question I had to answer was, how in the world am I going to figure out what somebody planned before they were born? Again, I come from a very conventional background. It didn't even occur to me, despite my own experience with the medium, that there are various mediums and channels in the world who can access this kind of information. The thought that occurred to me was, well, we've got the internet now. This was shortly after the internet had come out. I thought, there must be people somewhere in the world who remember planning their life. I will use the internet to find them. So I went to every spirituality message board I could find online, and I posted a notice saying, author, writing a book about how we plan our lives before we're born. If you remember planning your life, please contact me. And I start getting thousands of emails from all over the world. And wouldn't you know it, not a single one of these people remembered planning their current lifetime. They were writing in with stories about past lives on Earth, past lives on other planets, non-physical lifetimes. And these were fascinating stories. For example, There was a woman who recalled being an aquatic animal on what she referred to as the blue planet, which apparently was completely covered with water. But not a single one out of these thousands of people remembered planning their current lifetime. This went on for months. Finally, I began to despair of ever being able to write a book on this subject. And it was at that point that I metaphorically threw up my arms to the universe and I said a prayer. I said, "Dear God, if you want me to write a book on this subject, I will do it, but I need a little help here." And wouldn't you know it, within a very short time of making that statement or that request of the universe, I just happened to come into contact with 4 mediums and channels who in one way or another could find out what someone planned before they were born. One of the mediums in the first book, Your Soul's Plan, can hear the conversations we had with each other in the pre-birth planning sessions. So in working with her, I was able to eavesdrop, so to speak, on people talking to their future parents, their future children, their future friends, their future employers, their future teachers, their future enemies, if they were planning to have enemies. And I put these conversations verbatim into my books. The second medium in the first book is very gifted at channeling a person's soul. So if I was interviewing somebody for the book and wanted to talk with their soul about what was planned and why, I would work with her, talk to the person's soul directly through her, and ask, what did you plan for this lifetime and why did you make those plans? A third colleague in Your Soul's Plan is very gifted at talking to the quote unquote deceased. So if I was interviewing somebody for the book whose life challenge involves someone who's back on the other side, then I would work with her. She would call in the deceased loved one, and I would ask the person directly, what did you plan with this other person? Why did you make those plans? And the fourth colleague in the first book is someone who's very gifted at channeling angels, some of whom serve as guides to people once they come into body. So in working with her, I could talk to the angels directly and again ask what was planned and why. Now in the second book, Your Soul's Gift, there are 2 new colleagues, a trance channel in Michigan named Barbara. She channels an ascended master named Aaron. Aaron has access to the Akashic record, which you may know is the complete non-physical record of every word, thought, and action relevant to the earth plane, including the pre-birth planning. So in working with Aaron, he could go into somebody's Akashic record and find out what was planned and why. The other colleague in Your Soul's Gift is a channel in the Netherlands. She channels Jesus. And this gave me the extraordinary opportunity to talk with Jesus directly and again ask what was planned and why. And just on a personal note, I'll share with you, I was raised in the Jewish faith. So for me, the concept of talking to Jesus is quite mind-boggling, even to this day, after I've been doing it for many years. So I started to collaborate with those various mediums and channels. So the intentions of the work are, 1, to help people awaken, by which I mean come into some understanding that you are more than your body, more than your personality, more than your thoughts and feelings. You are in fact a holy eternal soul. You know, the body, the personality, the thoughts, the feelings, these are things you have, things you carry through a lifetime. But just because you have a thing, that doesn't mean you are the thing you have. For example, if you have a horse, that obviously doesn't mean that you are a horse. And by the same token, just because you have a body, a personality, and thoughts and feelings, that doesn't mean you are those things. You're not. Those are things you have, things you carry through a lifetime. But who you are is the eternal soul. The second intention of the work is to help people heal from their biggest challenges. And the third intention is to help people understand the deeper spiritual meaning and purpose of their biggest challenges, which is in fact a large part of the healing. So the format that the research took for the 2 books is that I would interview somebody about a common life challenge. And it's all the most common things we have here. Between the 2 books, we talk about alcoholism and drug addiction, mental illness, physical illness, miscarriage and abortion, adoption, suicide, rape, incest, financial challenges. If it's a common challenge, it's probably in one of the 2 books. Then the person I spoke with would have 1, 2, or sometimes 3 sessions with the mediums and channels in which we ask Spirit, did this person plan this experience before birth? And if so, why? And then I present all the information that came through. So in a nutshell, that is how these two books came into being. Now, let me share with you the 5 main reasons I have found why we plan big challenges for ourselves before we're born. If you're going to take notes, this would be the part to take notes on. The first main reason I have seen in my work for planning challenges before birth is balancing and releasing karma. Balancing and releasing karma are not the same thing. Balancing karma means that you choose to have a new experience that energetically offsets a previous experience. Releasing karma means that you heal the underlying tendency that created the karma in the first place. In other words, if all you do is balance karma without also releasing it, you will end up recreating the same karma over and over again. Let's take a simple example of balancing karma. Let's say that there are 2 people who had a past life together in which one was ill and the other person was that person's caregiver. When those 2 people transition back into spirit at the end of that lifetime and have their life review, as we all do, they may have a sense of unbalanced energy around that relationship. May is the key word there because they also may not. And they decide for themselves, we're complete with that relationship or we feel incomplete with it. They're not told by God or some council or some being external to themselves, you have karma here. They decide we feel complete with that or we don't. If they feel complete with it, then they go on and they plan a new kind of experience. If they feel incomplete with it, the feeling of incompletion, as I understand it, is the karma. So let's say they feel that way, what could they then do to balance the karma? Well, the easiest, simplest, most direct thing to do is simply to trade places. So now the one who is ill plans the life challenge of caregiving. The one who is the caregiver plans the life challenge of illness. What makes all of this so interesting and so challenging, I think, is that when those 2 souls get back into body, they won't remember their pre-birth plan, just as most of us don't. So the challenge becomes one of how do we give and receive love unconditionally in these very difficult circumstances of self-induced amnesia. And when I talk about giving and receiving love unconditionally, you know, the flow of love in the world is circular in nature. If you cut that circle in half, half of the circle is giving love to other people. This is what we all believe is a good thing to do, and we all try to do this. But it's actually only half the circle. The other half of that circle is receiving love from other people. So if you are someone who does not allow others to give love to you, you're actually blocking the flow of love in the world just as effectively as if you never give love to anyone else. And this, I think, is particularly relevant for a caregiving situation because, in my view, it's incumbent upon the one who is ill to receive love from the caregiver. That's reason number 1 for planning big challenges before we're born, balancing and releasing karma. The second main reason I have seen for planning big challenges before birth is healing. Now, let me share with you an example, a story from my first book, Your Soul's Plan. In Your Soul's Plan, there's a chapter about the pre-birth planning of deafness and blindness. The deafness story is a young African-American woman named Penelope. She was 24 at the time I spoke with her for the book. Penelope was born completely deaf in both ears. She and I worked with the medium I mentioned earlier who can hear the conversations in the pre-birth planning sessions. Now, because of Penelope's deafness, this session, unlike all the others I did, was done by instant messenger. So Penelope is in her home typing on instant messenger. I'm in my home typing on instant messenger, and Stacy, the medium, is in her home typing on IM. Stacy goes into Penelope's pre-birth planning session, and she hears the conversation Penelope had with her spirit guide when the deafness was planned. And what we learn in that conversation is that in the lifetime immediately prior to this one, Penelope had the same mother she has in this lifetime. And in that past life, when she was a little girl, she heard her mother shot to death by the mother's boyfriend. Now, she didn't actually witness the murder, but she heard the gunshots that led to her mother's death. As you can imagine, she was quite traumatized by that, so much so that it led her to take her own life in that incarnation. So Penelope returned to spirit with what you could call an energy of unhealed trauma, which now needs to be healed. In the pre-birth planning session, her spirit guide says to her, "My dear, Would you prefer to be born deaf so that no similar trauma will happen to you again, and so that you can complete your healing from the last lifetime? And Penelope responds, yes, that is what I want and what I wish to do. And then what follows is a fascinating dialogue in which she and her guide work out the details of her deafness. Just as an aside here, the fact that Penelope planned to be completely deaf, female, and African American is not random or arbitrary or coincidental. One of her pre-birth intentions was to cultivate or deepen in compassion in this lifetime. And she felt before she was born that this unusual combination of being completely deaf, female, and African American would put her in a lot of situations in which the situation itself would provide both the opportunity and the motivation to deepen in compassion. And this is in fact exactly what's happened. Through her experiences as a deaf person and a woman and an African American, she's cultivated tremendous compassion. And now she offers that to her students in the deaf community. She became a teacher to the deaf. But that's reason number 2 for planning big challenges before birth, healing. The third main reason I've seen in my work for planning challenges prior to birth is a desire to be of service to others. You saw that just a second ago when I talked about how Penelope is being of service. This component of service to others is something that I have seen in literally every single pre-birth plan I've ever looked at. It's always there in some form or another to one degree or another. Now, if you read spiritual literature, you've probably heard of the concept of oneness. This is the idea that there's actually only one being in the universe, and it's you, it's me, it's all of us. Each one of us is an individualized expression of the one. The way I conceptualize the orientation towards service is that it's a natural expression of oneness consciousness, which is our natural state of consciousness when we're back home on the other side. So in other words, let's say that you and I are back home in the non-physical and we're planning an incarnation together, and you perceive that I am literally you. It's not just an intellectual concept the way it is here. You actually perceive that I am you. Well, then of course, you will want to be of service to me. And conversely, if I perceive that you are literally me, then of course, I will want to be of service to you. So again, this orientation towards service, which is in everybody's pre-birth plan, is, I think, a natural expression of oneness consciousness, which is our natural state of consciousness when we're back home on the other side. That's reason number 3 for planning life challenges before birth, a desire to be of service to others. The fourth reason, and this could perhaps be the big reason out of the 5, is a desire to experience contrast. And let me explain what I mean by this. I shared with you earlier my experience of myself as unconditional love as I was walking down the street that day. The non-physical realm we come from, as I understand it, is a realm of complete unconditional love. So if we are made from the energy of unconditional love, which is what that experience showed me that day, and if we are in this realm of only unconditional love, that means that we do not experience any contrast to ourselves, which in turn means we don't fully understand or fully appreciate what it means to be a being made from the energy of unconditional love. So I think what the soul is doing here on the physical plane is that we have come for the experience of what you could call the not love, which we would all agree there's a lot of. Because through that experience, by the time you go home at the end of a lifetime, you have a much more profound understanding of what unconditional love is, which is another way of saying you have a much more profound self-understanding. Now, I realize this is a somewhat arcane concept, so to make it more accessible, I like to borrow an analogy from a book other than my own. You've probably heard of the Conversation with God books by the American author Neale Donald Walsch. In one of those books, the idea of experiencing contrast comes up, and God asks the author Neale to explain it using the analogy of the white room, which goes like this. Imagine that you are a white being in a white room. So you are white. The ceiling is white. The floor is white. All the walls around you are white. Everything in this room is white, including you. Now, if you are such a being in such a room, how do you know that you're white? Well, the answer is you don't. And in fact, you can't until you experience something that is other than white. Then once you've had that experience, you understand much more deeply what it means to be the white being in the white room. This, I think, is what we as souls are doing here on the physical plane. We are made of the energy of unconditional love. When we're home on the other side, we're in a realm of only unconditional love. We therefore experience no contrast to ourselves. We therefore don't fully understand or appreciate who or what we are. And so we come to Earth for the contrast and not love, because by the time we go home at the end of an incarnation, that experience gives us the contrast that in turn gives us a much more profound self-understanding. That's reason number 4 for planning challenges before we're born, the desire to experience contrast. And the 5th and final reason for planning challenges before birth, strictly speaking, is a subset of number 2, healing. But it's so important, I like to break it out as a separate item of its own. And that is correcting false beliefs or false feelings about oneself. Now let me explain how this one works. Almost everyone has had at least one past life, and usually many, in which certain things happened that caused you to pick up a false belief or false feeling about yourself. When I say false, I mean false from the perspective of your soul. 2 of the most common false beliefs or false feelings about self are 1, that one is powerless, and 2, that one is unworthy or perhaps even worthless. If you feel or believe yourself to be powerless or unworthy or worthless, to your soul that feels discordant. What do I mean by discordant? Well, imagine if you were to walk through an old abandoned house that's filled with spider webs. And you walk through a spider web and it clings to your face, it clings to your neck, it clings to your chest and shoulders. To you, this would feel, for lack of a better word, icky, and you would immediately try to brush or clear the cobweb, the spider web away. Very roughly speaking, this is how it feels to your soul if you, the personality, a portion of your soul's energy in a physical body, pick up a false belief or false feeling. It feels, again, for lack of a better word, icky or discordant, and your soul immediately wants to clear or heal the false belief or false feeling. So how is this done? Well, here in the 3rd dimension, which is where we are, what will happen is that you will call or magnetize or attract to yourself experiences that seem on the surface to confirm to you that you are in fact powerless or unworthy or worthless. This is actually a fundamental function of life in the 3rd dimension. The world is set up to mirror you back to you so that you can find out what lies within your consciousness, even if it's at the subconscious level, and then bring it to the light of conscious awareness where you can then set about healing it. So if you believe yourself or feel yourself to be powerless or unworthy or worthless, you will draw to yourself experiences that seem to confirm those false beliefs or false feelings. Now, I understand that what I have just described might sound harsh and even punitive, but I can assure you it is not the universe's intention to be either harsh or punitive. The universe is loving, and what it's trying to do in its infinite love for you, again, is mirror you back to you so that you can find out what lies within your consciousness, even if it's subconscious, and then bring it to the light of conscious awareness so that you can then set about healing it. That's reason number 5 for planning life challenges before we're born, a desire to heal false beliefs or false feelings about oneself. Now let me share with you a couple of true stories of pre-birth planning so you can get a better sense of how all of this works. You may have heard of Edgar Cayce. If you haven't heard the name, Cayce, who is now back in spirit, is regarded by many people as perhaps the best American psychic medium who ever lived. Late in Cayce's career, after he had already done sessions for thousands and thousands of people, he was visited by 2 sisters, 2 wealthy women from New York City. And the sisters said to him, "Mr. Cayce, we are at the end of our rope in regard to our brother. He lives under a bridge in New York. He drinks too much. We come from a wealthy family, but he long ago squandered his share of the family fortune. Over the years, we've tried everything we can think of to help him, and nothing has worked. Mr. Cayce, can you tell us anything that will help us help our brother?" Well, upon hearing this, Cayce did what he always did, which is he went into trance, he went into the Akashic record, and then he said to the two sisters, "Your brother is the single most highly evolved soul about whom I have ever obtained information. And the three of you planned together before any of you were born for him to do exactly what he's been doing so that the two of you could learn to be more compassionate." Well, that was not the response the sisters were hoping for, but this is how it works. But because we as a society don't know that this is how it works, we have all these very harsh judgments of people like the brother and people who experience certain other types of challenges: alcoholism, drug addiction, homelessness like the brother, certain illnesses like AIDS. And what are the judgments that we have about such people? Well, we say things like they're losers. They have to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. They need to get their act together. Some people even believe that AIDS is God's way of punishing homosexuals for being homosexuals. But I would submit to you, consider the sheer absurdity of these kinds of judgments in light of what is actually happening here. The souls who plan these sorts of experiences are tremendously courageous souls, and they're taking on challenges that most of us wouldn't dare to take on. And they're doing it in part to be our teachers, to give us opportunities to learn things. This is so important that this is why the first story in my first book is about a man who plans before he's born to have the AIDS virus. You know, everybody chooses a mission before they come into body. This man and another soul in his soul group, which is a group of souls who repeatedly reincarnate with each other, they were shown scenes of what life on Earth is like at this point in linear time. And they decided that society in general is very judgmental and not very compassionate. And they wanted to do something to help people put judgment aside and feel more compassion in their hearts. So the way they decided to go about doing this is that one of them would contract AIDS and the other would be the person who gives that person the AIDS virus. Now, what they're trying to do is give all of us an opportunity to look at him, the person with AIDS, once he's embodied, and put our judgments aside and choose, and it is a choice, to feel compassion in our hearts. Again, anybody who plans to take on a challenge like that is a tremendously courageous soul. And rather than be judged, that soul is worthy of our complete respect, as is every soul. So the Edgar Cayce story is a reminder. It's intended to indicate that this is what is really going on here on planet Earth in regard to pre-birth planning. So, you know, if you're walking down the street one day, and let's say you walk past a homeless person who's sitting in a cardboard box on the corner, if you have a thought like, get a job, that kind of thought really misses the mark, because it's very possible that that soul was in your pre-birth planning session and agreed to be there at that moment as you walk by. And yes, the planning is sometimes that detailed, so that you would have the opportunity to put judgment aside and feel compassion in your heart. That homeless person may be a tremendously highly evolved soul, perhaps much more highly evolved than you, who is there in service to you. And yet, because we as a society don't know that this is what is happening, we have all these tremendously harsh judgments of those kinds of people. Let me share with you one more story of pre-birth planning, and then if there are questions, I'll be happy to take them. In my first book, Your Soul's Plan, there's a chapter about the pre-birth planning of accidents, which I put in quote marks because they aren't really accidents. There are two stories in that chapter. One of them is an American woman named Christina, who is now in her 60s. When I spoke with her for the book, she shared with me the following true story that took place when she had been in her 20s. At that time, she was self-employed as an administrative assistant at a college in California. One of her daily duties in that job was to pick up her boss's mail. The mailboxes were in the basement of the building in which Christina worked. So on one particular day, just as she had done dozens and dozens of times before, Christina descended those stairs to the basement mailboxes. But on this particular day, unbeknownst to Christina, somebody had planted a pipe bomb in her boss's mailbox. When she inserted her hand to pick up the mail, the pipe bomb detonated. The force from this explosion was so great that it picked Christina up off the ground and hurled her 10 feet backwards against a concrete wall. There were 6-foot splinters of wood that were shot like arrows out of a bow into the wall around her. Both eardrums were ruptured, 2 fingers were severed, and flames from the explosion scorched Christina's body from head to toe. When she got to the hospital, doctors actually had to hold magnets over her eyeballs to extract the shrapnel from the pipe. So we're talking here about a level of suffering that is almost unimaginable to you and me. Now, Christina's recovery took 2 years and 10 reconstructive surgeries. At one point during that 2-year period, she was lying in her hospital bed in a tremendous amount of pain when suddenly she heard a voice inside her head, a voice that was not her own. It turns out that the force from that explosion, in addition to doing a lot of damage to Christina's body, had also opened up her psychic gifts. She had become clairaudient. And the voice she heard inside her head that day was one of her spirit guides. The guide said to her, "My dear, you planned this." And she said, "Why?" And then the guide told her, and here's what he said. He said, "You wanted, before you were born, to have a lifetime as a gifted healer. And you knew pre-birth that if you could heal yourself from the devastating effects of this bomb explosion, you could then take all of that wisdom and knowledge about healing and turn it outward in service to others." And there you see that motivation of service to others that I talked about earlier. Well, this is in fact exactly what Christina went on to do. After she recovered from the 10 reconstructive surgeries, she went back to school. She got a PhD in speech language pathology, and she set up a private clinical practice. At this point in her life, she's healed literally thousands of people. She actually has the ability to go into a patient's brain energetically, by which I mean non-invasively, and restore language processing capability in people who have lost that due to stroke or accident. So we're talking here about a remarkably gifted healer, and the only reason she could do any of this is because she healed herself first from that bomb explosion. Now, when I spoke with her for the book, she said 2 remarkable things to me. The first was, she said, "Rob, I have completely forgiven the person who planted that bomb." Now remember, this is somebody who had magnets held above her eyeballs in the hospital. And yet here she is saying in complete sincerity that she completely forgave the person who inflicted that kind of suffering on her. That in and of itself is extraordinary. But then she said something even more amazing to me. She said, "Rob, I am deeply grateful to the person who planted that bomb." And when she says she's deeply grateful, she really and truly means it. This, to me, is one of the most remarkable stories I've seen that shows what you can do with an awareness of your pre-birth plan. You can easily imagine that Christina could have chosen instead to be bitter and angry for the rest of her life. She could have chosen instead to be resentful for the rest of her life. She might even have chosen to devote the rest of her life to tracking down the bomber and taking revenge. But because she came into this awareness of her pre-birth plan, and then really worked with it over a period of years, it didn't happen overnight, she was able to get herself to a place of total forgiveness and then to a place of total gratitude. Now, her story is unusual in that it's a bomb explosion, but she herself is not unusual. If she can do this after what she went through, then you and I can do it no matter what our challenges have been. We can all work with an awareness of our pre-birth plan to get to that place of forgiveness and to get to that place of gratitude. Let me make a concluding comment, and then I'll be happy to take any questions. Some of you might know my first book, Your Soul's Plan, was originally self-published under the title Courageous Souls. The title Courageous Souls was actually not a reference to the soul. It was a reference to you and me, the incarnate personality. I chose that title because it takes a tremendous amount of courage to incarnate on Earth, and it takes even more courage to execute the pre-birth plan once you get here. Now, I have a workshop based upon the books. I travel around the world giving this workshop. And when I talk about how much courage is needed to incarnate on Earth, sometimes people will say something to me like, "Well, Rob, how am I supposed to think of myself as courageous when I'm afraid so much of the time? There's so much fear in my life." The answer to that very good question is that each and every one of you knew before you were born that fear was going to be a big part of the package here. There was no way you could not have known that. I would submit to you that only the courageous plan fear. I'll say it again. Only the courageous plan fear. So when you have that moment of wondering what the heck you're doing here, maybe even that moment of wishing you could leave and go back home, this is the moment to go to a mirror, look into your own eyes, and say the following: I am a holy, eternal, courageous soul. I'm the brave soul who left a realm of love and light and peace and joy to come here to experience great challenges so that I could balance and release karma, heal, be of service to others, experience contrast, and correct false beliefs or false feelings about myself. Because in my view, that's who each and every one of you really and truly is. So that is my story, and I'm going to stick to it. Thank you for listening to me today. And again, for more information, please go to yoursoulsplan.com. I want to take just a minute now, if I may, to talk about the Between Lives Soul Regression that I mentioned at the beginning of the talk. This, again, is a form of hypnosis in which you can find out what you planned before you were born and why you made those plans. Also, how you're doing in terms of fulfilling the plan and how you can better fulfill the plan. It usually takes 2 to 3 hours. It's always done by phone or Skype. I used to do in-person sessions, but then I found it actually works better by phone or Skype because people are more relaxed. So that's the way I do it now. And relaxation is the key to going into trance. The whole process starts with a series of mental and physical relaxation steps. Then I guide you into a past life. It's almost always a past life that had a big impact on the plan for your current lifetime. You'll experience several scenes in the past life, the last one of which will be the death scene. Your consciousness leaves the death scene in the past life and crosses back over to the other side, which I realize might sound a little bit ominous, but there's actually nothing to it. It's very safe, easy, natural, and gentle, and probably anybody listening to this presentation has done it hundreds, if not thousands of times. When you get back to the other side, most likely you'll be greeted by one of your guides, although it could be a deceased loved one, an angel, a master, a spiritual figure of significance to you. You talk briefly with whoever greets you about why you were shown that particular past life, why you need to know about it now, and how it impacted the plan for your current lifetime. And then we ask your guide or whoever you're talking to take you to what is called the Council of Elders. The council consists of the wise, loving, and highly evolved beings who oversee reincarnation on Earth. They know everything about you, every past life you've had, and the plan for your current lifetime. So when you get in front of the council, they can answer literally any question you put to them if it's for your highest good to know the answer. People come out of a Between Lives Soul Regression and they say things like, they answered every question I asked. I have no more questions about my life. Also, there are very often reunions with deceased loved ones who come into your meeting with the council. And the other two things I would mention is that people consistently talk about the total non-judgment they sense from the council and the overwhelming feeling of unconditional love they feel coming from the council. So people will often say things like, I could tell that the council knew literally everything about me, including all the bad things I've done in my life, and yet they loved me completely. And for most people, that's the first time they've had an experience like that since coming into body. So in many ways, it reminds you experientially of what the other side is like. So a Between Lives Soul Regression can be a transformative experience, helping you to understand the deeper spiritual meaning and purpose of the biggest challenges you planned before you were born. Again, the website is yoursoulsplan.com. And while you're there, please sign up for my newsletter. I won't spam you. I send only 2 or 3 newsletters per year. So thank you for listening to me today. I'll be happy to take any questions.
Wow, amazing, Rob. Thank you so much. I had goosebumps throughout your session listening to your experiences. It's amazing to know that we can plan our lives before we are actually born and to understand why we choose the challenges that we have in this physical life. I have definitely taken notes through the session and I'm going to contemplate on them. I think a lot of us have an inner calling, but only a few pursue them. And it's inspiring to know that you are one of those few. Friends, what I would say is next time you hear a little voice in your head or a strong feeling in your gut to do something, please don't dismiss it. Take the courage and follow it, as it can lead to something transformational in your life. And even if it doesn't, you will be left with a great, amazing experience. Thank you, Rob, again. And really, really enjoyed your session. Thank you again. We have a few questions. If you're okay to take a few questions for us.
Mhm.
Yeah, so the first one I've got here is the soul plan same as that of life between lives?
That is the same thing. The phrase or the term life between lives is a particular phrase that was developed by the American hypnotist Michael Newton. He is the person who pioneered the field of between lives regression. So he calls it a life between life or an LBL regression. I call it a between lives soul regression, but it's actually exactly the same thing.
Okay, thank you. That's good to know. Thank you. And there's another one. Can every soul using free will can really change destiny, which is designed pre-birth?
Within certain broad parameters. So you can think of the pre-birth plan as imposing these broad parameters on your life. Those are the contours and the outline of what you can do here. Within those very broad parameters, you have total free will to do whatever it is you choose to do, but you can't do something that is outside the broad framework of your life. So for example, let's say that you plan before you're born to be born with a physical handicap that can't be treated by medical science in the time period in which you're incarnating, which is something you would know before coming into body. Then short of a miracle, you're not going to be able to use your free will to change or get rid of the physical handicap. It's something that you will have for that lifetime. But there are very few things like that that are set in stone. Most things, when we talk about a pre-birth plan, we're talking about things that are planned not as certainties, but as possibilities or probabilities. Whether or not a possibility or a probability actualizes depends upon your free will decisions. As a general rule, the more loving your free will decisions are, the more you will sidestep challenges because you simply won't need them to make you a more loving person. On the other hand, if you use your free will to make unloving decisions, then more challenges tend to come into your life because you need them to steer you in the right direction. That is not a judgment, it's not a statement of blame. It's simply something that I have seen again and again in the research I've done for the 2 books.
That's really good to know. Thank you, Rob. Patricia, would you like to say a few words to Rob, please?
We are all immensely grateful to this great master, who is so very scientific, spiritual-scientific master. I have read both the books long time back. And since that time, I was wanting to see this master. And today I got the opportunity to see this master and listen to him. What a great thing. Swamiji, we from the Pyramid Spiritual Society movement, we bow down to you for your wonderful work, for helping all of us in India.
Thank you. I appreciate that very, very much. Thank you.
Please visit India next time and visit our main center in Bangalore.
I would like to.
Pyramid Meditation Center. We will be very happy to receive you.
Thank you.
Please make a note that you should visit India and our center.
I would like to. I really would. Well, thank you for having me in the conference.
Thank you, Rob.